Awe came upon everyone because many signs and wonders were being done through the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, they spent much time together in the temple. They broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts. They broke bread at one another's homes, praising God and having the goodwill of all people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. I don't know who said life really begins when the kids leave home and the dog dies, but it's not true. It's just not true. My dog died a couple of months ago, and my daughter just turned 40, and she's been out of the house for 20 of those years. You know, it's so funny. Today she's 40. It's really weird how we're the same age now. I stole that from Kim Stewart, who stole it from her dad, Henry Jones. But my life is more full of family than when I just had a couple of kids to raise, because they're closing in on their middle years. They've got grandchildren. They've got stuff going on. We do more things. It's just, it seems like I have an awful lot of obligations to grandchildren. And the dog died, and I still have a dog. Another, the one dog didn't die, so, that doesn't feel like freedom either. The births and deaths that happen in our lives, the literal births and deaths and the figurative, metaphorical, spiritual births and deaths, they're just part of a cycle. They're part of a cycle, and some of these changes are huge, and some of these changes are so small, we brush them off like they don't mean anything, and then they come back later because they may have been deceptively small. Sometimes it's the little changes that deserve a little more attention and a little more respect because they touch our souls too. Most of the time, the changes we notice are physical changes, right? I got a new car, is it just me, or do you just freak out every time you have to rent a car someplace else? It's like wearing somebody else's shoes, right? It's a little bit of a change, and I have to give myself a little grace when I do that and say, it's okay, you've never driven one of these before, just take a breath, adjust the seat, back. You don't have to face down cancer to know disappointment. And you don't need a 6-figure income to know victory. If you need a reason to grin, join in. If you need family and kin, join in. If you want to fight sin, join in. If you want to feel God within, join in. If you want to begin, join in. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, and to the breaking of bread and prayers. These are the people who are the very baby church after Jesus' death. And in the verse immediately before this verse, we hear that they became an instant megachurch. In Acts 1:15, they have 120 terrified souls gathering together in that upper room after Jesus' death. And he's appeared to a few people, but they're in this upper room and they don't know what's happened. And then by the time we get to Acts chapter 2, verse 41, they've got 3,000 people coming to church. Now, don't be fooled. Bigger is just bigger, smaller is just smaller. Bigger churches aren't better, smaller churches aren't better. That's not about how big their church got. It's about the change God was making in people's lives and how much they needed to be together to live into that change. It's about how our faith requires community to be strong and fruitful in our lives. It must have been about 2008 or maybe 2009, and I got a request. I was at a church in South Orange County in San Clemente, and I got a request to do a wedding for the daughter of the personal secretary of Rick Warren. Now, for those of you who don't know Rick Warren started a church in Saddleback, California, down here in Mission Viejo-ish sort of area. And at that time, in the 2008, 2009, they averaged 20,000 people every weekend, maybe more. It was a phenomenally big place. And so, I was a little curious. I was asking the mother of the bride, how come you're not doing this where you are? Well, turns out the bride, there were two brides. The daughter of Rick Warren's personal secretary was marrying a woman. And I was willing to do that, but they don't do that at Saddleback. And we had a little conversation about this one of the times we were just sitting there together. It was really an interesting conversation. We really enjoyed each other. She had been privy to all of the ways that Saddleback had grown from nothing into one of the most famous, most successful, at least in terms of size and influence, churches. And she said, we need churches like yours. Because I was saying, well, we don't have that, and we don't have that, and we don't have this, and we don't have that. And I don't publish books, and because no one would read my books, because I'm not Rick Warren. Although I have to tell you, one of the things I like to say, and this is apropos to our church, is, I read Rick Warren's book about how to grow a church. I did what Rick Warren did, and I got the results Rick Warren got. Said nobody ever. And she said, we need churches like yours. We are the big front door for people who think they don't want to go to church. We don't really look like a church. We got a rock band. It doesn't look like a traditional church. People are wearing their sneakers and their whatever. She said, it's so easy for people to come to our church, and there they meet Jesus. She said, but eventually they grow. A lot of them deepen and grow, and they don't get what they need. We have everything, but they need something different. We send them to you. We're a team. We have a common mission. We have different roles. We have the same mission to change lives through the way of Jesus. That's where I got that, is from her name. I don't even remember her. And we are grateful for you, she said, and of course, I learned to be grateful for Saddleback. Is it fair to say that all churches are or should be about change? Is it fair to say that all Christians are meant to be changing and to be change makers? I believe so, if we are walking in the way of Jesus. Today's story is certainly about change. Awe came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. They came and joined because something wild and woolly and delightful and joyful was happening. If you need a reason to grin, join in. If you need a reason to grin, join in. And one of the most noteworthy wonders and signs that gets mentioned specifically here in this part of Acts is a radical transformation of people's approach to economic security. New Christians are embracing a more communal life. They don't all live together, they still have homes, but they do a lot more stuff together, and the rich gladly sell property, and then they share it with the needy. Thomas Keating says, our capacity for the transcendent, the mysterious, the mystical, the spiritual, is precisely what distinguishes us most from the rest of this visible creation. It's what makes us most human. It just rolls down like a mighty river, and we're filled with wonder. It must have been a time of great joy and delight and laughter. Occasionally someone who's new sometimes will come and say, there just seems to be a lot of people joking a lot at your church. I said, yeah, we like to laugh. We enjoy each other's company. There's something about the joy of being a part of a faith community, Something about who we are when we're here, and what we do here, and what is done for us here, and what we do together. It's hard to describe, but you can sense it. People sense it. There's something of awe and mystery and contentment and laughter and joking and hilarity and contentment and joy when we pay attention and join in. Monty Don is famously the host of BBC's long-running global phenomenon called Gardener's World. He's a famous gardener. And I was watching an interview with him recently, and it's a year or two old maybe, and he talked about growing up as an active Christian. His parents were very devout, and he said that with great respect and appreciation. And he shared a little bit about that, and his interviewer said, well, do you consider yourself a practicing Christian now? He said, well, I don't. I do sense that I'm connected to God. He said, and then you could watch him thinking in the interview. He said, but you know, whenever I go to church for a funeral or a wedding or for Christmas or because my family's going, I don't go often, but when I go, I think, I really like this. Why don't I come more often? I really like this. Why don't I do this more often? And I thought it was really telling that right there on camera, he let us see him thinking, wondering if, in addition to all the other places he'd named about how he connected with God, and certainly if you're a gardener, hardly any more explanation is needed than that, but that there might be something happening among the gathered faithful that would be good for his soul care. If you need to grin, join in. Acts 2:44, all who believed were together and had all things in common. If you need family and kin, join in. In her book called The Deepest Belonging, Kara Root tells part of her story about a man named Marty. She was a preacher in a church, a pastor, and a man in that church who she loved. It wasn't a big church, everybody knew everybody. Named Marty, got to the point where his chemotherapy was no longer working, and he was told he had about 6 weeks to live, and he'd had about a year-long, maybe, journey with cancer. And here's what she wrote. A thinner and completely bald Marty walked into my office and sat down in the chair facing me. Thanks for meeting with me, Kara, he said. Without hesitation or pleasantries, he plunged in. I don't know what to do. The chemo isn't working. The doctor wants to do another kind of chemo that has even less success, but I have been so sick. I don't want to do this. I won't do this. They don't know for sure, but they think I have maybe 6 weeks. And to be honest, Kara, to be honest, Pastor, I'm afraid. I'm really scared. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to go through this. I don't know how to do all the things. Find hospice, go through all of this alone. And of course, you know what she said, Marty, you're not alone. You're not alone. There are at least 30 people right now who will drive you to any appointment you need, bring you food, help you figure out hospice. You're not alone, Marty, you have us. And then this was the amazing genius part. She talks about where she says, I let go of his hand. I let go of his hand. And looked right in his eyes, and I felt something dawn on me. But Marty, she said, you're going where we're all going eventually. You're just out in front, leading us. You're going on a journey that every one of us will be taking at some point. Would you be willing to share that journey with us? And a lot of the story that fills the rest of this book tells a far-reaching and yet unremarkable, an astonishing and yet everyday miracle of the church being the church. Church being the church. Thomas Keating says, our capacity for the transcendent is precisely what distinguishes us most from the rest of visible creation. It's what makes us most human. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer says, the church is the church only when it exists for others. The church is the church only when it exists for others. If you need family and kin, join in. And then verse 45, they would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. I am not going to encourage you to do that just now, because I don't want you thinking about money when I tell you this story. This is not a story about money, except it's a story about money. So we're going to talk about this because my next little thing is, if you want to fight sin, join in. You know, I made all these up, and some of them are lame, and that one's a little corny, and it's not really accurate. Sin is a really loaded word, isn't it? You know, if you want to fight sin, join in. But if you consider the word sin in its most accurate context, sin is anything that damages the relationship between us and God, or us and other people. So if you can consider that to be sin, not a list of bad things that you do, but a way of living, or a way of living out of your own wounds that makes it so you are far from God or far from others. If you'll consider that, then you'll know that sin is the word for the things that takes over our souls in the place where God should be. Our own practices, our blindness to our own failings, the damage they do, our lack of self-awareness about how we hurt other people, those things keep our soul away from God. Other people's sins can hurt us too. And then we carry wounds and resentments because we do get damaged by other people. Sometimes they do it because they can't help themselves. Sometimes, people will tell me sometimes it's never personal. I'm like, well, it sure feels personal. But it really is a reflection on other people. Sometimes we just get damaged by life circumstances. Sometimes it's just bad luck. And there's an old Jewish joke that says, God, why me? And God says, why not you? I should give this trouble to someone else. Still, sin can be a place that we live in spiritually that can be deadening. It can be deadening. And the illustrating point in Acts is not here. How did this happen again? This happened just as I was leaving. Anyway, I know the story. So Ananias and Sapphira are part of this community. And they said, hey, Peter, we're going to sell a piece of property and give all the money to the apostles. And Peter says, that's great. And then along comes Ananias, the husband, and he's there in the gathered room with Peter and everybody else. If you have my sermon, you can bring it down to me. I don't know what happened. This happened 2 weeks ago, too. There's something wrong with me. Actually, there's something wrong with our printer. Anyway, Ananias says, well, here's the money. And Peter says, look, you know that's not all the money. You held some back. Why did you hold some back? And Ananias just drops down dead right there. Drops down dead with shame. Couple of hours later, Sapphira comes in. And she says, thanks. And she says, oh, has Ananias been here? Did he give you the money? And Peter says, yeah. Are you in on this too? Did you lie too? And she drops dead. So apparently, you can die of shame. Apparently, you can die of shame. And obviously, this story is meant to scare the money out of you. But I think that's a little bit the wrong end of the stick. It's just not really about money. It's about that Jesus is inviting us into a big life change. And you can see that Ananias and Sapphira want to be a part of that community so badly, they make a commitment they can't follow through with. Their mouth writes a check, their heart won't cash. I think we're meant not to despise Ananias and Sapphira, but to have compassion for them. To know that something marvelous, miraculous, deeply healing and joyful was happening. They just wanted to be a part of it, and they just kind of overextended for their capacity to do things. You know, Colossians 3 says that Christians come up from the water when they're baptized into a resurrection. We are made new. We are changed. We are not the same as we were. And we probably are on the outside, but on the inside, spiritually, we have connected with the abundant eternal life. We are now more spiritual than we are physical. So in fact, says Paul to the church at Colossae, Those who have been raised with Christ, in other words, brought back up out of baptism into the resurrection, have new expectations placed on them. You have a different set of expectations than before you came into Jesus' world. You have new possibilities accessible to you before you came into Jesus' world. New capabilities given to you since you came into Jesus' world. You have been raised with Christ. If you want to feel God within, join in. You know, these shifts are all-encompassing. Takes Luke 6 verses in the 2nd chapter of Acts to introduce us to a completely different way of living. A completely different way of living. It's a different way of being with one another. It's a different way of being in the world. And it's not just, I follow Jesus so I can be a better person. It's so I can participate in something completely different. I think most of us are comfortable calling that love. We want to live in love. We want to love the world. We want to live out of love. Love is what we need. Love is everything. The path of Jesus is the path of love. And you can begin or begin again any time, any day, even today, even here, even now, even in this very room.